First of all, thank you very much. That was a most enjoyable 1 hour. Could have happily been another hour.
Yes. Oh, you don't know the danger you're in.
I congratulate you on that. An amazing research you have done and continue to do.
Thank you.
I like to pride myself on being a social historian of Colchester.
Okay.
Is there any evidence of women's football during the Great War in Colchester?
Yes.
Did you all hear the question?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, I found at least one game, and it was basically Paxman's, the factory,
Yes.
and I think they lost quite heavily to the Ipswich ladies.
Yay!
Ladies and gentlemen, our Ipswich lady.
There was an amazing scene in, I don't know if people know this, Ransom's was like
Yes.
almost like one of the biggest
Yeah.
factories in the country, was Ipswich, wasn't it? And they had interdepartmental football. And one of the things that is a struggle is to find the history of interdepartmental matches. So I found 3 for the Sterlings, which is amazing, before they got the full team going. But the Ipswich Star, I think it was back then, actually advertised the interdepartmental matches. So it's almost a case study for me, so that's a future project I want to do, of all their matches. And then they actually didn't play the Sterlings, but they played the magnificent Marconis and so on. So, but not that much going on in Colchester, just the odd whisper of a game.
Thank you.
Holly.
Hello.
So around the time it was like the suffragettes were getting quite a lot of traction, and there's a mention in the play of Pankhurst. Was there any evidence to sort of show that some of the girls were involved in that? I know, especially in the north in London, there was a lot of activity. Or was it more like focused?
I've found no evidence for that. I have a remarkable item in my collection. I've got all sorts of odds and sods, and I could really do 3 evenings on
I
what
think
I've
we're
got.
going to have Steve back.
But one of the more remarkable items is a postcard, and I've never been able to verify this, and I think the date is 1910, it's dated, and it's a picture of men in top hats and suits, and it says Lords, like as in the Lords, versus Suffragettes football match. Right? And I've never been able to verify. It looks completely genuine. That I picked up for a couple of pounds. Could you imagine? Well, I don't know if you would know, but if there was the equivalent, which there would have been, postcard of the Suffragettes football team from 1910, that would be worth quite a few pennies, way beyond my
I really hope it's true.
ability to maintain domestic peace, if I was to try and. But no, so that's the only kind of reference I've found.
There is, as you said, a reference to Mrs. Pankhurst. Or as one of our cast members called her, Mrs. Parkhurst. So, we won't go on about that, Chris. Done.
Yeah, it was just the particular ladies and just kind of the definition of world champions, I guess.
Yeah.
How did that kind of come about? And I kind of looked at the fixture list and they didn't ever seem to have left the United Kingdom. So did they actually leave the shore?
Did you hear the question at the back? Yeah?
No.
No? Dick, sorry, Dan, you just say it again.
Yeah, sure. So it was just a definition of world champions.
World champions.
And just kind of, did they ever leave the United Kingdom to play football?
Oh, he's getting his line.
Sorry. So it's one of those spotlights. It's right, isn't it? It's like interrogated. What I didn't want to focus on too much tonight was the Ditka ladies, because that's the one that in the national media you only ever hear of one team. But they are by far and away the greatest women's football team of all time. And my granny played for them from 1923 till 1935. But they formed in 1917 and they continued to 1965. And inspirational genius that ran the team was Alfred Franklin, and he's almost like I would say a Harvard casebook study on brand management. And this is why I think that the supporting striking minors is nonsense, because he needed the oxygen of publicity, so he needed the newspaper editors. And you know, if he'd have overtly allowed the team to support striking minors, then they wouldn't have got the publicity they needed. And he used to, yes, they were the British champions, then were the world champions. It's marketing. It's genius marketing, isn't it? And but it's no more than marketing. You know. There was no official women's football in this country till 1971. But he did do loads of internationals, and I think one of the things that happened when the ban really started to bite, after the French tour to here in 1920 and then the return tour to France, which they went on, they then had another French tour as Olympique de Paris in 1922, and then they went to America. They were going to play in Canada, but the Dominion Football Association wouldn't allow them to play in Canada, so they ended up in America and they played against 9 males teams, the only time they were play against male teams, and then they came back from that. Then there was a bit of hiatus through the 20s. I really just did this to reflect the highlights of some of my granny's later career, so this is only just a snapshot. But this amazing woman, who I've written a couple of articles describing as the most important woman footballer in history, Carmen Pomies. What a life! She was upper middle class. She played for the Dick Kerr ladies, so she's in the famous British Champions postcard, which is on the monument at Preston North End. She then went over back to France, and then over the 1930s brokered something like 70 internationals, bringing French teams over. 1936 brought a team over. When the Belgian team came over in 1934, which were pretty much the best team in Europe, she came over as translator for them. She spoke 4 languages. She was a hero of the resistance in the Second World War, and then after the Second World War, France is a very broken country. She went over to America and built a life for herself there. She was a translator at the UN. Honestly, this woman lived about 12 lives over sort of, I feel...
They almost play as England then, when they travel, basically England.
Yeah, if
Were
you
they
see...
called England? Or was
They called themselves England, so this is the famous game at Herne Hill Velodrome in 1925. There's a clip on that. If you type into Google BFI Fair Footballers, the clip comes up and you can see Lily Parr and my granny trotting out, and George Roby, who was the music hall comedian of his day. He wasn't about football actually. His artist team once beat quite a good Chelsea 11, and they had Mickey taken forever about that. But if you see the Dick Kerr ladies in the black and white stripes, that will be like their domestic kit, if you like. When you see them in the white kit, they are putting themselves forward as England. Obviously not official, because they weren't allowed to be official to 1971. But that really is only a snapshot. But it's me trying to show that despite what you see on the telly sometimes, there were huge women's football games taking place in the 1930s.
Good question, John. Thanks.
Great
Anybody else?
question.
Gentleman at the back.
Steve, let's go back. What about Germany in the 1930s? Was there much women's football going on in Germany under the?
There was a little bit.
Were there any games?
Yeah, there was more in Austria, but very little in Germany. There was an amazing character called Lotte Sprecht, and she got a women's football team going. I think they only played for a season or 2. There's a lot of hostility.
So the Führer wasn't a fan.
Sorry?
The Führer wasn't a fan.
No, it wasn't at that stage. I don't think it was big enough to cause that sort of problem. But she then went on to become a kind of a music hall entertainer. She did a music hall act, but she did it in private in people's houses. So she went around people's houses doing this music hall act. So I don't know. That's all I know about German women's football. There is an amazing researcher called Helga Faller, Helga Helge. And there aren't many people I would hold up as rivals to the kind of research I do in the depth, but he does in Europe, and it's amazing. And for instance, in the 1920s, I have a book of his, and it's A4, and it's 200 pages, and that's just one season of French women's football. So this is not just a British story. So super question, Steve.
And what about other European countries apart from that?
Yeah, all over. And in fact, the latest thing I read from Helga was he was finding snippets of games in Romania. There's some well-researched games in Italy before the fascists disallowed it. So there's a lot more coming to light over different parts of Europe. One country that really did come down heavily on the ban, which I found quite surprising, was Holland. Because we think of Holland as a very liberal country, but it didn't get going really until the 1950s, and that was women handball players who said, sorry, we're going to play football.
Wow. James at the back.
Tactically, what did the team play like? The reason I'm asking is because my understanding of early males football was passing was seen as being kind of like not really tough. It was basically just dudes running forward. So what was women's football like tactically?
That's a good question.
Very good question.
Especially for those of us who have to recreate a football match on that stage. It's 7 weeks' time.
So I'll take that to a specific, because it's a very hard question to answer. But the Sterlings, there's been quite a lot written about them. They were heavily followed in the newspapers, and a number of the articles emphasise the teamwork. So some of the other teams were a bit naive, and they'd be hurting like you'd see young kids. I think one of the things about the Sterling factory was the sort of cooperation between the men and the women. So the women, who some of them who would have been fairly new to football, some would have grown up playing it with their brothers, but they were given loads and loads of tactical training. And so one of the reasons why, because they came very close, they had 36 games, 34 wins, 2 draws, but they came close to losing that sort of Invincibles title. And if you think about that, if they would have just lost one game, we would have had this play,
Yeah,
we wouldn't be sitting here, there would be no Dagenham Invincibles. It's that that's sort of put them on. But one of the reasons why they were able to maintain that was their ability to play proper structured football and pass the ball around. And the other little answer I've got to that, which I think is quite interesting, is when you watch out for this next year when the World Cup, when next time the Women's World Cup comes around, the Euros, that the Dick Kerr ladies were unbeatable and so on and so forth. In 1923, as well as being beaten by my granny St Helens, I don't know if I mentioned that, they were also beaten by Stoke, 1-0, nearly 2-0. But they were also beaten by the top Scottish side of that era, Rutherglen Ladies, and it talks about the famous Scotch professors, the passing game, and it was the passing game that defeated them. So maybe I get the feeling that the Dick Kerr ladies, the Lancashire lasses, were playing the old booted up, get to Lily Bar on the wing, she knocked the ball in, and when they met that passing game of the Scottish side, and again the correlation with the male football. So I really must insist, whilst you've got Grant here now, ask him about Sir Alf. Come on.
I was just going to say something about. I mentioned Sunday football earlier as being similarly kind of outlawed, as a sort of bandits football. They used to call the Sunday football as the Outlaws, and there was a really fantastic guy in Dagenham who sponsored Sunday football because he was a local kind of grocer and cafe owner. He was of Italian heritage, and he used to open his cafe on a Sundays, and the council used to really get annoyed with him. So I think just to sort of aggravate them, he sponsored Sunday football, but he also sponsored women's football. So this is in 1935, 1936, 1937. There was something called the Merino Cup, and there were two teams, a local Dagenham team, so I presumably it drew on the sort of heritage that Steve's been talking about, and I think
There was a Dagenham Dock Ladies.
Dagenham Dock Ladies, and I can't remember where the other team came from. I think it was Kent somewhere. And interestingly, Kent in the late 1960s was one of those areas where women's football was really thriving. So people they did have supporters, but they were seen, Sunday footballers, women's footballers, very much as outlaws. And that's because the FA really did try to control how the game was seen. But also, interestingly, the FA secretary who appointed Alf Ramsey was made FA secretary in early 1962. The secretary was like the sort of chief executive. This guy called Dennis Follows. And Dennis Follows was appointed in early 1962. He's an ex-trade union boss. He was the head of the British Airline Pilots Association. So, you know, he was used to politicking. And he came in, and within 10 months he'd appointed Alf Ramsey. He then oversaw the 1966 World Cup tournament, which was run brilliantly well, really. And, of course, England won it. And in 1970, he was the secretary of the FA when women's football was legalised. He had 2 daughters. I've spoken to one of them for my book. And, you know, he used to take his daughters to football matches. I'd love to find some evidence about what Dennis Follows or Ralph Ramsey thought about women's football. It's really difficult to find direct evidence because the FA publishes their minutes, but of course these are the official minutes, they're typed up. The really interesting thing is the discussions behind them in the meetings, and the informal minutes that were handwritten. None of those have survived. So there's so much that we'll probably never know. But Dennis Follows appointed Alf Ramsey, and he oversaw, as the FA, saying, come on, we've got to rescind this ban and allow and support women's football. And he's actually was made an honorary kind of fellow of the Women's Football Association. Yeah.
I'd like to ask, well, not a question, but I've discovered so much this evening. And Sir Alf also championed another kind of player grant, which is an untold story that I'm particularly interested in. So can you tell them about that?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I had to write the book kind of came to me. There's several connections, family connections with bits of Alf Ramsey's story that were untold. But in 2019, I was rooting around in the archives because that's the sort of thing that we like doing, you know. And I took myself off for my birthday to the archives of Ipswich. Jane said, if you fancy a treat, so there I am.
Jane is his long suffering.
The 13th of December, trundling through the foggy Suffolk countryside to get to Ipswich, because I'd seen something in an online archive that I thought might be interesting. And it was the book of the director's minutes for Ipswich Town after the war. I thought, well, there might be something in there about the appointment of Alf Ramsey. And it was, 8th of August 1955. It's all written up in this beautiful cursive handwriting with a fountain pen, about Alf Ramsey being appointed. And there was a little note in the side, and it said, player E.J. Phillips to appear in court. Or, player E.J. Phillips faces a serious charge. Well, that's interesting. I think, I wonder who that is.
Ted Phillips.
And it was Ted Phillips. Ted Phillips is an absolute Ipswich Town legend, a hulking centre forward in the classic English style, whose shot was scientifically measured in the early 1960s at about 70 miles an hour. Because honestly, had a harder shot than Bobby Charlton, who was meant to have the hardest shot in English football. Anyway, Ted Phillips, I saw the same day as Alf was appointed. There was this a serious charge. And about 7 or 8 weeks later, Ted Phillips pleaded guilty in court. And he pleaded guilty to what was then a criminal offence, which was indecent behaviour with another man. And this is 1955. The homosexual reform law was only reformed in 1967, and even then very partial. The mid-1950s was a peak period for the prosecution and persecution of gay people and people who'd had some sort of gay relationship or were bisexual. Ted Phillips was a 21-year-old professional footballer, and he said, okay, I'm going to renounce my contract, probably under pressure from the club. They said, well, we'll retain you as a professional, and we'll send you out to Stowmarket Town on loan for a year. And he went to Stowmarket from 1955 to 56. And then in early 1956, this wonderful document that I was reading on my birthday, it kind of showed how Alf Ramsey went to watch Ted Phillips play. And he really liked what he saw. He said, this guy's one hell of a player. And he said, we've got to bring him back in. And some of the directors kind of were going, about that, Alf Ramsey went to he's special, we've got to bring him back in. He brings him back in, reintegrates him into the squad for the season 1956-57. And in that season, Ted Phillips, who's been admitted in court to homosexual relationship with another man, comes in and he scores 41 league goals. Still a record for Ipswich. They win the 3rd Division South on goal average. That's the first title that Alf wins. They go on to win the 2nd Division, the equivalent to the Championship today, and Ted scores 31 goals. They go on to win the 1st Division, the Premiership equivalent today. He scores 27 goals. Without Ted Phillips, there's no way that Alf Ramsey would ever have become England manager. And it was Alf who brought him back in. His career and England winning the 1966 World Cup depended upon his approach and his attitude to Ted Phillips. So, that's an amazing story. And that's why I wrote that book, because it came to me and I needed to write that up. But that's only one of the stories. And the reason that story is important is because of what it says about Alf. Ted went on to get married. First marriage didn't work. Second marriage, incredibly happy. Kids, But when he was 21, he admitted in court, that offence as it was then. And Alf Ramsey reintegrated him back into a squad. And not only reintegrated, built a career around him. And you could even say a club. 1966 would never have happened without 1955.
Which for me, and people who know me, as a gay man, that fills me with so much pride.
And
it really does.
I've got very good gay friends, and whenever I've told them that story, they've gone, wow. Because we still don't really have.
Well, we have no male gay football.
Well, there's one in Blackpool. His career hasn't really gone anywhere. He's 23 now, I think. There's been no elite first, top level player who's come out, which is just daft. Because let's face it, it's just like it's crazy. Why not?
Whereas the women's game is
it's just
simple.
Exactly, and it's just taken for granted.
And it doesn't make any
It's just part of life.
Hinselberger came out, but that was after he retired.
Yes, and it's
I just flicked through the book. I had no idea that Alf didn't become a professional footballer until he was aged 27, which I find quite astonishing. Nor did I know that he had gypsy roots. And as I've got gypsy roots, I'm pleased to see that.
Oh,
Do you know what, Headgate? We need to get Grant back to do it.
oh, that's incredible. There's another question at the back, and then we'll go.
I've got 2 questions actually. First, just on the story you just told us, when he came back to Ipswich, were there issues with the terraces giving him stick,
Well,
as it would be in the modern era? Or
So
it was
what's really interesting is there was about a 300-word little story in the Ipswich Evening Star when the court case had been heard in October. But whether it was, the club was run by the Kobolds then, who were a very kind of patrician, whether it was managed to be hushed up, I don't know. But there's no way that the other players would not have known about it, because I remember reading, I grew up in the 1960s, and you read the local newspaper from cover to cover. So, there was no secret in a small community like, even a small town like Ipswich. No secrets at all. So it would have been known by everybody. But it wasn't, there was nothing from the terraces and nothing from his fellow players. Now I think probably in 1956-57, when Alf brought Ted back in, that, then things might have been said, but we have no record. And none of his teammates have ever referred to it. He may well have been groomed. There were 4 people convicted at the same time in 1955 in that court case. 3 of them pleaded guilty and were given conditional discharges, because that's what gay men then had to do. Because otherwise, all the evidence was heard in open court, and that would have been a field day for the newspapers. The older man, the 30-year-old man, was jailed for a year. He was seen as the ringleader. Now, he also had, it was referred to not in open court, he'd had contacts with people under 18, with kids. So I think he was jailed for a year, and it could be that Ted Phillips was groomed. It could be that Ted Phillips was in the army for a couple of years. It could be that Ted Phillips was experimenting.